The heat inside the clapboard chapel was not merely a temperature, it was a physical weight, a suffocating woolen blanket pressed against the faces of the congregation. It was late August in a territory that God seemed to have forgotten, a land where the rain had not fallen in 6 months and the earth had cracked open like a dry lip. The dust was omnipresent. It floated in the shafts of sunlight, piercing the grime-streaked windows, settling in the creases of Sunday suits and coating the dry tongues of those gathered to witness the sacrifice. Clara Vance stood at the altar. She was 19, though in that moment, shrinking under the gaze of the town, she felt like a child. Her hand was trapped in the grip of the man beside her, Silas Thorne. The name itself tasted of ash. He was a man of 50 years, perhaps older, with a chest like a barrel and a ranch that consumed 3 counties. He was a widower 3 times over, a man whose silence was more terrifying than his shout. His thumb dug into the soft flesh of her palm, a possessive, rhythmic grinding. It was a warning. You are mine. Clara kept her eyes fixed on the splintered wood of the cross behind her father's head. Her father, the Reverend Vance, was sweating profusely. His hands shook as he held the Bible, rushing the liturgy, tripping over the holy words. She could not look at him. If she looked at him, she would see the guilt, the desperate, pathetic plea of a man who had wagered his daughter to cover a gambling debt that had hollowed out his soul. Silas had bought the church's mortgage. He had bought the parsonage. And finally, he had bought her. And do you, Clara, take this man? The question hung in the stifling air. She smelled Silas then, a cloying mixture of expensive bay rum, stale tobacco, and the sour tang of whiskey sweating through his pores. She wanted to retch, she wanted to scream, but she saw her mother in the front pew, a woman faded to gray, twisting a handkerchief into a noose. "I do," Clara whispered. The lie burned her throat. Silas didn't wait. He jammed a thick gold band onto her finger. It was heavy, cold, and too large. It slid around her finger like a shackle. The walk from the church to Silas's manor on the edge of town was a blur of heat and humiliation. He did not offer her a carriage. He marched her down the main street, his hand clamped on her bicep, parading his acquisition. Her dress, a re-stitched gown that had belonged to her grandmother, dragged in the red dust, turning the hem a bloody rust color. The townspeople watched from the shadows of their porches, their eyes averted. They knew, everyone knew, the house was a monstrosity of dark wood and stone, looming against the setting sun. Inside, it smelled of old leather and grief. "Upstairs," Silas commanded, releasing her arm only to shove her toward the dark staircase. "The master suite." Clara climbed. Every step was a hammer blow to her heart. She entered the room. It was vast, dominated by a 4-poster bed that looked like a sacrificial altar. Silas followed her in, the heavy oak door clicking shut with the finality of a coffin lid. He walked to the wash basin, pouring a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He downed it in one swallow, then poured another. Clara stood by the door, her spine pressed against the wood, her fingernails digging into her palms until they bled. She knew her duty. She had been raised to obey, but the terror rising in her throat tasted like bile. This was not the nervousness of a bride. It was the primal instinct of prey realizing the wolf is in the room. Silas turned. His eyes were wet and glazed. "Take it off." Clara's fingers fumbled with the tiny pearl buttons at her throat. They were slippery with sweat. "Slowly," he growled, sitting on the edge of the bed. The mattress groaned under his weight. "I want to see what I paid for." She turned her back to him, a futile attempt at modesty. As she struggled with the fabric, her eyes darted frantically around the room, seeking something, anything, a weapon, a way out. Her gaze landed on a peg on the wall near the wardrobe. Hanging there was a black leather belt. It was not a belt for trousers. It was thick, oiled, and coiled like a viper. Beside the bed, the drawer of the nightstand was slightly ajar. The flicker of the candle caught a metallic glint inside. Clara took a trembling step closer, pretending to struggle with a button. She nudged the drawer further open. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a pair of iron handcuffs. The scream died in her throat. The stories of the other wives, young, healthy women who had withered and died, crashed into her mind. This wasn't a marriage bed. It was a torture chamber. "I said take it off!" Silas roared, standing up. The sound of his boots hitting the floorboards shattered her paralysis. Instinct took the wheel. She didn't think, she moved. She grabbed the heavy ceramic pitcher from the wash basin and hurled it. It missed his head by inches, shattering against the wall in an explosion of water and pottery shards. "You bitch!" he bellowed, lunging for her. But the surprise had bought her a heartbeat. Clara grabbed a heavy wooden chair and swung it with all her might at the window. The glass exploded outward. The cold night air rushed in. She didn't look back. She scrambled through the jagged frame, the glass slicing her arms and tearing the silk of her bodice. She landed hard in the flower bed below. The breath knocked from her lungs. Above her, Silas was at the window, his face purple with rage, roaring for his men. "Get the dogs! Get the horses! Find her!" Clara ran. She ran past the stables, past the silent bunkhouse, and into the scrub brush of the high desert. She was barefoot. She was bleeding. She was wearing a wedding dress that glowed like a beacon in the moonlight. She ran toward the dark, jagged silhouette of the canyonlands, the only place where a person could disappear. She ran until the soles of her feet were raw meat. She ran until her lungs burned like they were filled with acid. She scrambled up shale slopes, sliding back, clawing at the earth. Behind her, the sound of hooves and the baying of hounds echoed off the canyon walls, a terrifying chorus. She hid in a crevice of rock as the riders thundered past, so close she could smell the sweat of the horses. She held her breath until black spots danced in her vision. When silence finally returned, it was the silence of the grave. She moved deeper into the wilderness, climbing higher, seeking the cold ridges where the dogs couldn't scent her. The temperature plummeted. The desert heat vanished, replaced by a biting, high-altitude chill. She walked for hours, then days. Time lost its meaning. There was only the pain, the cold, and the terror. She reached a high pass, a desolate place of wind and rock. Her strength finally failed. She stumbled, her legs folding beneath her, and she collapsed into a snowbank. The cold was no longer painful. It was a warm, inviting numbness. She curled into a ball, the shredded remnants of her wedding dress fluttering in the wind, and closed her eyes. Jericho Kincaid hated the settlements. He hated the noise, the commerce, and the hypocrisy of men who prayed on Sundays and cheated on Mondays. He lived in the high country, a man of the mountains, trading pelts for coffee and cartridges only when absolutely necessary. He was tracking an elk when his horse, a massive gray gelding named Ghost, pinned his ears back and snorted. "Easy," Jericho whispered, his hand drifting to the rifle in his scabbard. He scanned the ridge, nothing but rock and the skeleton of a dead pine, and then a patch of white that didn't belong. He dismounted and approached slowly, rifle raised. It looked like a pile of snow, but the texture was wrong. He lowered the weapon as he realized what it was. A woman. She was curled on her side, half buried in a drift. She wore a dress that had once been fine silk, now torn to ribbons and stained with mud and blood. Her feet were bare, purple and swollen. Jericho stood over her, his jaw tightening. This was trouble. A white woman, alone, half dead in the high peaks. This was the kind of trouble that got a man hanged. He should walk away. He should get back on his horse and ride. The woman let out a sound, a low, broken whimper that was barely human. Jericho cursed softly. He wasn't a savior, but he wasn't a monster. He knelt, pulling off his glove to touch her neck. Her skin was like marble, but beneath it, a pulse fluttered. Faint, thready, fighting. "Ma'am," he grunted. No response. He sighed, his breath pluming in the frigid air. He scooped her up. She weighed nothing, a bundle of hollow bones and frozen silk. He carried her to Ghost, mounting awkwardly with her in his arms, and turned the horse toward his cabin. The cabin was small, built tight against a rock face to withstand the avalanches. He kicked the door open and carried her inside. He laid her on his cot, stoking the fire until it roared. In the firelight, he saw the damage. Her feet were a mess of cuts and frostbite. Her arms were slashed. She was burning with fever, despite the cold of her skin. For 3 days, the blizzard raged outside, sealing them in. For 3 days, Jericho Kincaid became a nursemaid. He bathed her wounds with warm water and pine salve. He spooned broth between her cracked lips. He listened to her delirium. "The belt!" she would scream, thrashing on the cot. "The drawer! Don't let him! Please!" "Easy!" Jericho would rumble, holding her shoulders to keep her from hurting herself. "Ain't nobody here but me." On the fourth morning, the fever broke. Clara opened her eyes to a ceiling of rough-hewn timber. She smelled wood smoke and coffee. She tried to sit up, but her body felt like it had been trampled. A man sat by the fire, sharpening a skinning knife. He was huge, his shoulders broad beneath a flannel shirt. His hair was dark, tied back with a leather thong, and his beard was thick. He turned to look at her, his eyes a piercing clear gray. "You're awake," he said. His voice was like gravel crunching under a boot. Clara flinched, pulling the heavy wool blanket up to her chin. "Who are you? Where am I?" "Name's Jericho. This is my cabin. Found you on the ridge, froze half to death." "How long?" 4 days. Clara looked at the window. It was blocked by snow. "I have to go. He'll come. He'll find me." Jericho went back to his knife, the rhythmic shing-shing filling the room. "Nobody's coming up here, ma'am. Pass is snowed in. You're stuck. Stuck. Trapped again." But as she watched him, she realized he wasn't looking at her with hunger or cruelty. He was looking at her with indifference. "Why did you save me?" she asked. He paused. "Didn't seem right to leave you for the wolves, though I reckon you might have preferred them." Over the next week, a strange silent domesticity formed. Clara healed. She began to move around the cabin, her feet wrapped in thick bandages. She swept the floor. She cooked the rabbits he snared. She watched him. He was a man of solitude, moving with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing. He treated his horse with a tenderness he never showed her. He never asked her name. He never asked why she was in a wedding dress. One evening, as the wind howled outside, Clara broke the silence. "My name is Clara," she said. He didn't look up from the harness he was mending. "Clara, I ran away from my husband." Jericho stopped. His hands went still. "Husband? He isn't a good man." She needed a lie. She couldn't tell him the truth, that she was the property of Silas Thorne, the most powerful man in the territory. "He beats me. He tried to kill me." Jericho looked at her then. His eyes narrowed. He saw the bruises fading on her arms. He remembered her screaming about a belt. "A man who beats a woman ain't a man," he said quietly. "He's a dog. He'll kill you if he finds us." Jericho snorted. "Let him try." The atmosphere in the cabin shifted. They were no longer strangers. They were co-conspirators against the winter. They talked. She told him of books she had read. He taught her how to read the weather in the clouds. One night, he was washing up at the basin, stripped to the waist. Clara watched the firelight dance over the scars on his back, thick raised welts that crisscrossed his skin like a map of pain. "What happened to you?" she whispered. He froze. He pulled his shirt on quickly, turning to face her. His face was a mask of old agony. "I was a boy," he said, his voice hollow. "In Texas, a wealthy man's wife. She was lonely. She talked to me. That's all. But he found us, accused me of forcing her." He spat into the fire. "Because of who I was, because I was poor trash, they branded me, prison farm, 3 years. He looked at her, expecting disgust. "I didn't touch her, Clara. I swear it." Clara stood up. She walked across the room, ignoring the pain in her feet. She reached out and laid a hand on his chest. He flinched as if burned. "I believe you," she said. Jericho looked down at her, his breath hitching. He had spent years building a fortress around his heart, convinced he was a monster. And here was this broken bird, looking at him like he was a hero. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. "I'm dangerous. You are the safest thing I have ever known." He made a sound, half groan, half sob, and then he kissed her. It wasn't a grabbing, demanding kiss like Silas would have given. It was a question. "May I?" Clara answered by wrapping her arms around his neck. That night, in the heart of the storm, the wedding dress lay forgotten in the corner. Clara Vance learned that touch could be healing. She learned that passion wasn't about ownership. It was about a shared, desperate need to be alive. Spring arrived, not with a whisper, but with a roar. The melt began, and the pass cleared. Jericho rode out one morning to check the trap line. He returned at a gallop, his face pale beneath his beard. "Pack," he ordered, bursting through the door. Now! What is it? Riders, 3 of them, down at the trailhead. They're asking about a runaway bride, offering a reward. He looked at her, his eyes hard. Silas Thorne, that's who you ran from. Clara went cold. Yes. He's a rich man, a powerful man. He's a monster. I know. Jericho grabbed his rifle. We're leaving, north, to the territories. They rode for days, pushing Ghost to the limit. They avoided the roads, sticking to the tree line. But Silas's men were professional trackers. The ambush happened in a box canyon. A shot rang out, chipping the rock by Clara's head. Down! Jericho roared, shoving her behind a boulder. 3 men appeared on the ridge. Give us the girl, Kincaid, one shouted, and maybe you walk away. Go to hell, Jericho fired. The shootout was a chaotic blur of noise and smoke. Jericho was a demon, moving and firing with terrifying precision. He dropped 2 of the men, but the third, a man with a long gun, caught him. Jericho grunted, spinning around as the bullet tore through his shoulder. He dropped to one knee. Jericho! Clara screamed. The last gunman stood up, aiming for the kill shot. Clara didn't think. She grabbed Jericho's fallen rifle. She remembered what he had taught her. Stock to the shoulder. Breathe out. Squeeze. She pulled the trigger. The kickback bruised her shoulder, but the bullet struck the gunman in the leg. He fell screaming. Ride! Jericho gasped, clutching his bleeding shoulder. He dragged himself into the saddle, pulling Clara up behind him. They fled, leaving the carnage behind. Jericho was fading. The blood loss was too great. He slumped against the horse's neck. Clara took the reins, guiding them. She knew where they had to go. Jericho had mentioned a settlement, a place of peace people, Mennonites, who lived in a valley 2 days' ride away. She kept him awake with stories, with threats, with promises of love. When they finally crested the hill and saw the neat white farmhouses of the valley, Jericho was unconscious. An older man with a white beard met them, Elias. He saw the blood, the exhaustion, and he simply nodded. Bring him in, Elias said. We have sanctuary here. Clara watched as the women of the community, led by a stern but kind matriarch named Martha, tended to Jericho. She stitched his wound herself, her hands steady, driven by a fierce love. For a week, they rested. Jericho healed, his strength returning with the spring sun. But the peace was a fragile illusion. Word came from the trading post. A warrant. Silas Thorne had issued a bounty for Jericho Kincaid, wanted for kidnapping and rape. The reward was $500. He's coming, Jericho said, standing by the window of the guest cottage. I have to leave. If I surrender, he'll let you be. No, Clara said. He'll hang you and drag me back to that room. I won't let him. We can't run forever, Clara. Then we stop running. We fight. With what? Guns? No, she said, her eyes blazing. With the truth. A circuit judge, Judge Alder, was due in the settlement the next day. He was known to be a hard man, but fair. When Silas Thorne arrived, he brought a posse of 10 men. He rode into the peaceful Mennonite square like a conquering king. I want my property, Silas bellowed, and I want the head of the bastard who took her. Judge Alder stepped out onto the porch of the meeting hall. There will be no hanging today, Mr. Thorne, unless it is by my order. The trial was held in the church. The air was thick with tension. Silas stood, red-faced and arrogant, waving the marriage certificate. She is my wife, he shouted. Legal and binding. This man is a criminal who abducted her. Jericho stood silent, his hands shackled, his eyes on Clara. He was ready to die for her. Then Clara stood. She walked to the front of the room. She looked small in her borrowed gray dress, but her voice was steel. I was not abducted, she told the packed room. I ran. She told them everything. She told them of the gambling debt. She told them of the belt on the wall. She told them of the handcuffs in the drawer. She spoke of the cold, the fear, and the man who had found her in the snow and treated her with honor. This man, she pointed to Jericho, did not touch me until I asked him to. He saved me. He healed me. She turned to Silas. You bought a piece of paper, Silas. You did not buy me? Silas sneered. She's lying to protect her lover. She is my wife. The law is clear. Judge Alder looked at Silas, then at Jericho, and finally at Clara. The law, the judge said slowly, requires consent for a marriage to be valid. Coercion voids the contract. And furthermore, the judge looked at the certificate. You claim she is your wife, yet she claims she fled on the wedding night. Was the marriage consummated? Silas sputtered. She ran like a thief. Then by your own admission, the union was never completed. Judge Alder ripped the certificate in half. This marriage is annulled. Clara Vance is a free woman, and as Mr. Kincaid acted as a rescuer to a woman in distress, the warrant is dismissed. Silas roared, reaching for his gun. Before he could clear leather, Jericho had stepped in front of Clara, and 10 Mennonite men had raised their shotguns. Go home, Mr. Thorne, Judge Alder said coldly, before I hang you for attempted murder. Silas Thorne left, defeated not by a bullet, but by a woman's voice. They didn't stay in the valley. It was too crowded, too tame. They needed the sky. They found a plot of land high on a mesa, overlooking the plains. They built the cabin themselves. Jericho felled the trees, his swing powerful and rhythmic. Clara stripped the bark and mixed the mud for the chinking. It was a hard life. The winters were brutal, and the work never ended. But it was their life. Jericho tamed horses for the settlement, gaining a reputation as a man who could gentle the wildest Mustang without a whip. Clara became a midwife, traveling to help women bring life into the world, whispering courage into their ears. One evening, a year later, they stood on the porch of the cabin they had built. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges. Clara leaned her head against Jericho's chest. He wrapped his arms around her, his large, scarred hands resting on the swell of her stomach. You okay? He rumbled, the vibration moving through her. I'm perfect, she whispered. She looked out at the vast, wild world. She thought of the girl in the white dress running through the dark, terrified and alone. She squeezed Jericho's hand. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who had walked through the fire and found the one thing worth burning for. She turned in his arms and kissed him, tasting the pine and the wind and the freedom on his lips. We're home, Jericho, she said. We're finally home.